Our political and economic systems are under immense strain. From the disconnect between political elites and the everyday person on the ground, to the authoritarian tendencies of big states, to the inequality, poverty and suffering generated by unchecked capitalism. Do you know, I think that we're witnessing the limits of centralized power. It's time to think about how we bring the individual back into economics and politics. But I think that as individuals, we need to change in order for things to be truly different. Personal transformation is critical for society to be transformed. I'm interested in exploring alternatives that offer true democracy, social equality and economic justice. The capitalist neoliberal model of democracy is built on hierarchy. Those with the wealth have the power. Those with the wealth have the influence. And this results in a small number of people having a disproportionate amount of control. Large hierarchical institutions, whether state or corporate, they tend to concentrate power at the top. And this concentration of power leads to a system that's inherently authoritarian, regardless of whether it operates under the banner of democracy or capitalism. In theory, modern democratic systems are supposed to represent the will of the people, but in practice, they usually end up serving the interests of the political and economic elites. The problem lies not just in who holds power, but in how power is structured. Centralized systems of control, whether political or economic, foster inequality and exploitation. In capitalist economies, the wealth generated by the many is siphoned off to benefit the few. In political systems, elected representatives are often more accountable to corporate interests than to their constituents. What we see today is a system that's designed to actually perpetuate itself, not to serve the common good. Worse than this, control of the press and media means that we're constantly gaslighted into the view that government is actually serving the people. It's not. Economic and political decisions are far removed from the citizens that they actually affect. I don't believe that we can have true equality within a hierarchical system. We need to turn the hierarchy on its head. Politicians should be serving citizens. No one reasonable would actually disagree with that, but it should be the citizens that decide how they're served. It might sound like I'm proposing revolution, the overthrow of the current system, but I've come to the view that trying to change the system from the top is fundamentally flawed. The most well-meaning person running the country couldn't possibly know what best serves individual citizens. Although the big state seems very efficient and alternatives potentially so inefficient and chaotic, this cannot be used as a justification to continue hierarchical control. An authoritarian state can be incredibly efficient and really get things done, but I believe that we need to respect each and every individual, and there needs to be some way of truly balancing every person's needs. I think we need a system which has much more local decision making. So, I propose a radical idea. Change starts with the individual. Change starts from the bottom up. Our society works in a way that most of us are so busy trying to earn a living that we don't have time to engage in the decisions that affect our economic and political environment. I think this can be changed. But this change does start at the level of the individual. The individual has to break free of what the hierarchical system tells us that we should be doing, working harder and harder to consume more and more. If you're happy working harder and harder and consuming more and more, I've got no right to tell you you should be doing anything different. But more and more people are realizing that this current economic system does not work in favor of the average individual. There's a reason why mental health diagnoses are at an all-time high. Change has to come from the individual. We have to want something different. And by transforming ourselves and fostering communities built on mutual aid and cooperation, We can build a better society. Now, I'm hesitating to use the word anarchism because it's such a loaded term, but let's take a little look at anarchism. Anarchism challenges the hierarchical structure by advocating for the decentralization of power. Rather than relying on large impersonal governments or corporations to make decisions for us, anarchism calls for local communities to take control of their own affairs. When people think of anarchism, they may think of chaos. However, I think anarchist ideas are interesting to the extent that they propose the creation of a more direct form of democracy, where individuals and small groups make decisions through consensus, cooperation and mutual respect. Just imagine that. Where decision making happens at the most local level possible. Neighbourhoods, communities and workplaces governing themselves, free from top-down authority. This doesn't mean an absence of organisation, but rather a shift towards horizontal structures of power where people can work together as equals. All that said, I do think that anarchism only takes us so far. Capitalism has created a system of consumers that want more and more. It's created a system where finding sustainable fulfillment and meaning is almost impossible. So I don't think that this is only about structural change. It's also about personal transformation. This is critical. If we want to change society, we must first change ourselves. This is where anarchism intersects with a deeper, kind of more spiritual dimension. To build a more just and cooperative society, we must cultivate empathy, kindness, and a commitment to the collective good. As individuals, we need to become less selfish, more community-minded, and more aware of our interconnectedness with others and the world around us. When I talk about spirituality here, I'm not talking about subscribing to any particular religion. Instead, I'm talking about developing an inner awareness, an inner resource that transcends material concerns and focuses on our collective well-being. Anarchism, with its emphasis on mutual aid and cooperation, really aligns with this vision of personal growth, I think. It's about recognising that true freedom and happiness come not from accumulating wealth or power, but from living in harmony with others and with nature and the environment. If a critical mass of individuals were to undergo this kind of personal transformation, society as a whole would dramatically change. I think it would be inevitable. If we cultivate empathy and cooperation in ourselves, we can create communities that embody these values, which in turn would inspire broader societal shifts. This more local vision of society is one where communities would be based on mutual aid rather than competition. Instead of the ruthless, profit-driven logic of capitalism, such a system would promote cooperation and collective responsibility. In a community-minded society, resources would be shared equitably and decisions would be made collectively, ensuring that everyone's voice is heard. In practice, this means organising our lives around non-hierarchical relationships and institutions. Worker cooperatives, community land trusts, neighbourhood assemblies. These are the type of structures on which we can start to build a society based on mutual aid and collective decision making. These structures don't just offer economic benefits, they foster a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and these things are essential for both the individual and collective well-being. The spiritual dimension, I think, reinforces this approach. When we see ourselves as part of a larger whole, we naturally gravitate towards cooperation rather than competition. A community-minded society isn't just about changing our economic systems. It's about transforming our relationships with one another, moving from a mindset of competition and domination to one of care and of empathy. The beauty of what I'm discussing is that this doesn't have to start with a massive societal change. We can start today. Change doesn't have to come from top-down revolutions. It can begin with small personal actions. By transforming ourselves, by becoming more mindful, more compassionate, and engaged in our communities, we lay a foundation for broader change. How do we transform ourselves? I don't think that any one person can tell anyone else how they need to change. If you're not happy with your life, if you're not happy with our current and economic political system, then I guess that you probably are interested in exploring alternatives. What I would say is question everything, research alternatives, explore Marx's ideas on how workers are exploited, explore ecological ideas on the negative impact of mass consumption, explore spiritual ideas on how to be happy. To be honest, I'm still developing this idea into a coherent plan. But what I'm proposing is a really simple idea that society doesn't need to change for any individual to find peace and happiness. That can only come from within. Once that comes, it almost doesn't matter what economic system is in place, because life has transformed at the individual, local level. And if enough of us change, then society will inevitably change. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.